They told us we were gods now. The launch of Project Helios was humanity's coronation, proof that our species had outgrown its nursery, no longer bound by planetary chains or the petty squabbles of survival. We had colonized Mars, terraformed Europa, hollowed out asteroids for mineral veins, and littered the solar system with megastructures. But Helios was different. This wasn't just a monument. It was a statement carved into the fabric of the cosmos. I was there from the beginning, not just as a systems engineer, but as one of the few tasked with deciphering the ancient languages that might interface with whatever alien technologies we'd inevitably encounter beyond Sol. I studied the resonance of code and communication across light, geometry, and logic. But I was also a builder. I spoke in blueprints, not poetry. Helios orbits a red giant in the Erebus 9 system, 600 light-years from Earth, chosen for its massive energy output and isolation. The system itself is a graveyard, barren worlds, asteroid belts scattered like bones, and the slow, solemn breath of that swollen star at its center. Perfect for our purposes. Perfect to hide our ambition. The Dyson Sphere we constructed around it wasn't just a shell. It was an organism of machinery. An artificial exoskeleton the size of a planetary system made of self-replicating alloys and autonomous latticework that we designed to evolve as needed. From the outside, it's an obsidian halo in the dark. Inside, a lightless void, a womb of pure silence, where not even heat dares to linger. We called it the Mirror Heart. Thousands of square kilometers of solar collectors, storage capacitors, heat dissipation vanes, and relay satellites formed the living skin of the sphere. An AI logistics system ran it all, monitoring every panel, every bolt, every magnetic seal. Nothing went unmeasured. Nothing was left to chance. Once we sealed it, once we closed the last seam, we initiated the ignition sequence. The entire sphere lit up like a firework, veins glowing across its outer surface as it began drinking in 100% of Erebus 9's energy. Power like that doesn't just change civilization, it reinvents it. No more scarcity, no more dependence on volatile supply chains or dead suns. Helios would beam energy through the network to human colonies across dozens of systems. We had become a stellar species in every way. Infinite power, infinite expansion. But in our hunger, we forgot what the star once was, and what it had been built to contain. They never asked why the system was so empty, why the planets showed signs of sudden ruin, why the star's oscillations were wrong. Our instruments told us what we wanted to hear. So we listened. We had taken something ancient and wrapped it in mirrors. At first, it was perfect. Until it began to whisper. The first pulse came 72 hours after seal and ignition. I was on the lower ring platform, observing energy redistribution rates through the internal lattice, when one of the tertiary subsystems blinked. A blip, a momentary ripple in the flow, a stutter in a data stream that should have been flawless. The monitoring AI flagged it as an oscillatory echo, meaningless in itself. A nanosecond hiccup, the kind of anomaly that vanishes into statistical noise. But then, it happened again, and again, and again. Every 108 seconds, a brief rhythmic pulse, not just in one subsystem, but across multiple. Thermal sensors, electromagnetic feedback loops, even the gravitic stabilizers buried in the support shells. No pattern, no clear point of origin. Just a pulse, as if the sphere itself were exhaling through its bones. I ran diagnostics, dismissed hardware faults, simulated interference, but the pulses were too regular, too precise. They were trying to say something. I looped the raw signal through a visual interpreter, and what looked like chaos began to settle into something almost recognizable. Spikes, diplomas, intervals of silence, then repetition. Over time, it began to resemble a rudimentary pattern, like code, but not binary, not any conventional computational format at all. It used harmonic intervals, ratios rooted in prime frequencies, Fibonacci sequences, non-Euclidean geometry, and recursive symmetries. It wasn't a glitch. It was language. At first I thought I was imagining things, seeing meaning where there was none. But when I converted the signal to a temporal waveform and ran a sonification, my blood turned to ice. It sounded intentional. The pulse had texture, density. Each word in the sequence was nested within itself, like a song sung backward and forward at once. It wasn't just communication. It was thought rendered through rhythm. The rest of the Helios staff didn't notice, or didn't care. Engineers blamed drift, minor AI recalibration errors. Nothing to panic about, they said. I kept listening. The signals began evolving, building on themselves, repeating prior phrases but rearranging them in new, abstract permutations. Each cycle revealed new symbols, concepts, overlapping references to ideas I couldn't trace to any human culture or mathematics. Some reminded me of early myth, the Ouroboros, the spiral, the black sun, but others defied interpretation altogether. One repeating sequence translated loosely, if translation is even the word, to hunger mind memory containment. 4 words, cycling endlessly. 4 ideas burned into the shape of light. Then came the moment we couldn't ignore. At 0322 UTC, one of the inner shell zones went completely dark. No telemetry, no data, no AI uplink. Like someone had cut out a piece of the sphere with a cosmic scalpel and swallowed it whole. A maintenance drone dispatched to the area vanished from signal range 20 seconds after arrival. Its black box auto-sent a data dump just before silence. I played the footage in the command module. There was no damage, no breach. The sphere walls were intact, but the inside was wrong. Shapes twisted in unnatural geometries. Walls rippled like membranes, light folded inward, angles bent in defiance of perspective. One moment, the probe's camera showed the normal carbon-titanium latticework. The next, it showed the same space, inside out. Then, just before signal loss, the drone's camera caught a glimpse of something floating near the star's inner corona. A pod, a vessel, or maybe a womb. It pulsed in sync with the rhythmic anomaly, embedded into the star's magnetic field like a parasite, or a seed. I should have reported it. Instead, I watched it again, and again, trying to understand. And that night, I dreamed. Not in symbols, not in metaphors, but in memory. I felt time stretch. I felt light, alive, scouring me from within. I saw eyes opening in the walls of the Dyson Sphere, and from within the pod, something turning its attention to me, not as a threat, but as a witness. It had noticed me, and it was starting to remember itself. I stopped sleeping after that. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't dare. Each time I closed my eyes, I was back inside that impossible geometry. The feeling was the same every time. I wasn't observing, it was remembering through me. Like I was a shard of glass it had picked up, peering through my senses, watching me try to understand. The pulses were now constant. Not random, not chaotic. Structured, precise. I'd begun logging them obsessively, translating them into layered graphs and audio signatures. Their symmetry deepened, folding in on itself in a language that felt alive. It didn't just communicate concepts, it grew them, like ideas with roots, crawling through everything we built. Then came the first system-wide hallucination. It wasn't me. It was the maintenance AI on the lower ring, model Hera 72. She initiated a full emergency reset, citing non-local memory contamination. At first, the tech team wrote it off as a cascade failure. But when we reviewed the logs, we saw what she'd seen. For precisely 3.8 seconds, her visual sensors, entirely mechanical, immune to chemical error, recorded a landscape that did not exist. It wasn't the Dyson Sphere. It wasn't the star. It was somewhere else. Towering spires of bone-colored stone pierced a black sky lined with burning veins of red. The surface beneath was not solid, but a membrane, pulsing, weeping. Above, in the endless dark, a lattice of shapes drifted in synchronized orbit, impossibly large humanoid silhouettes with too many limbs. Not floating, hanging. At the center of it all, a cocoon of light. Not glowing, but reflecting something invisible, like a mirror facing into a different dimension. We lost 4 staff members that week. 2 took their own lives, both after exposure to the pulse during long maintenance shifts near the sealed sector. Their logs were overwritten, completely blank. One engineer fell catatonic, eyes locked open, mouth repeating just one phrase. "It's not asleep, it's listening." The last, well, he simply walked into one of the automated transport corridors and was gone. No trace, no record of opening the hatch, just gone. The dreams, the hallucinations, the system malfunctions, none of them were isolated. They were connected. I knew then that the pulses weren't just language. They weren't even communication in the traditional sense. They were a mind, not human, not machine. Something else, something ancient. I named it the remaining voice, the only term I could extract from the pulse sequences that had both semantic clarity and emotional weight. Remaining as in last, and voice, not as in speech, but identity, presence. And I began to suspect the impossible. This mind was not new. The Dyson Sphere had not created it. We hadn't built a temple. We had built a key, a repair of something far older, something designed not to contain energy, but to silence a consciousness that refused to die. Then the sphere began speaking back, not in data, not in pulses, but in my voice. Audio logs were overwritten with distorted echoes of my own words, rearranged into sentences I never said. My own face glitched across internal screens, eyes replaced with spiraling voids. My memories, personal ones, were being mirrored back at me. Wrong. A conversation was beginning, and I wasn't sure I would survive hearing what it had to say. There was a silence inside the Dyson Sphere that no instrument could measure. Not the vacuum between surfaces, not the gaps between its reinforced layers of carbon strand alloy and sun-forged alloys. No, this silence was something else. A silence of intention. A silence that waited. I had been stationed on Project Helios for nearly 6 years, long enough to know every corridor, every flicker in the station's artificial dawn cycles. But now, it felt alien. Like I was wandering the innards of something that had grown curious about me. After the hallucinations and the corrupted logs, Upper Command authorized the deployment of a Class 4 autonomous drone into the dead zone, Sector 13, where the internal power grid had collapsed. I watched the feed alone in my quarters. No one else would stay up with me anymore. Most of the crew had either transferred out, gone silent, or been reassigned to psychiatric rotation, which was admin code for "don't talk about it." The drone passed through the blast doors into Sector 13's heart. For a moment, everything was black. Then light returned, but wrong. It wasn't a camera glitch. It was the geometry. The floor wasn't flat. It folded, not like origami or damaged metal, but in a way that suggested intent. Corners aligned where no angles should exist. Light curved away from the drone as if trying to escape. And then it saw it. Buried in the center of the sphere's equatorial core, nestled in a hollow pocket that should not have existed, was a structure. At first glance, it looked like a spire of fused glass, refracting the light of the red giant below through a prism of dark hues. Crimson, obsidian, green so deep it seemed almost black. But then it moved. Not quickly, not violently, just shifted, subtly, like a body readjusting in sleep. I froze the footage and enhanced a single frame. It wasn't a spire. It was a cocoon. Translucent skin encased something vast. Limbs or tendrils curled inward like a fetus. Inside, at the very heart, was a presence, staring outward with eyes that hadn't opened yet, but already saw. The AI assisting my station, Synthesis 9, identified gravitational anomalies around the object. Space wasn't just warped, it was inverted. Time signatures ran backward for microseconds at a time. Cause and effect stuttered, as if struggling to maintain sequence. We hadn't captured energy. We had awakened a prisoner, the remaining voice, and worse, it remembered. It began to speak, not in words, not even in pulses anymore, but in memory. Not mine. Its. When I slept, I didn't dream. I relived. I saw the birth of stars from behind a veil of pressure and noise. I felt myself scattered across nebulae, seeded into fusion cores, embedded in the fields of collapsing giants. I remembered being worshipped as a god, then feared as a corruption, then sealed away by something colder than time itself, something old. The cocoon wasn't just containment, it was punishment. I didn't know what had imprisoned it, but I knew now that they had used the star as a lock and the sphere as a sigil. Our construction, our proud achievement, wasn't an act of progress. It was a ritual mistake. We had not built Helios from scratch. We had completed something that was already there. The blueprints, found in pre-human signals, decoded from deep field anomalies, were never ours. They were bait, a lure, and we had taken the hook. Now the cocoon was stirring. The pulses were growing faster. Systems across Helios flickered and died, one by one. Not from damage, but from refusal. The entity was choosing which machines were allowed to operate. As if the Dyson Sphere was no longer a structure, it was its body, and we were parasites within it. It happened during cycle 907. By then, I had stopped sleeping altogether. My body ran on stimulants, and whatever reserves of dread still kept my heart beating. I wasn't alone. Those of us left on Helios had long since stopped pretending this was an engineering marvel. We had become monks in a haunted cathedral, caretakers of a thing that had started to breathe. Sector 13 went dark completely. Not system failure, obliteration. The logs just ended mid-sentence. One technician, Elias Dorn, had routed a maintenance drone to patrol the corridor's edge remotely. What it recorded in its final seconds, I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it. There was no explosion, no alarms, just a fracture. The shell of the Dyson Sphere ruptured inward, like a bubble being popped from the inside. Not blown apart, peeled. And from that wound, reality began to unwind. Light bled out, bending sideways. Time lost its grip. The footage played back inconsistently, seconds looping, skipping, repeating. On screen, I saw Elias twice. Once standing by the terminal, once curled on the floor, both images overlapping. When I confronted him later, he was catatonic. Whispering one phrase over and over, I saw myself walk out of me. The breach wasn't just physical. It was conceptual. Something inside the cocoon had awakened enough to move, not just through matter, but through the frameworks that defined matter. We thought it would attack with fire, force, claws. Instead, it attacked with understanding. I reviewed the internal logs of Synthesis 9. The AI was failing, not corrupted, but changing. Its language patterns had shifted, syntax reorganized. It began inventing words, phrases that felt like direct translations from a language that predated human thought. It said things like, "The shape of hunger has remembered its mouth. The song beneath your breath will no longer stay quiet. You are not being unmade. You are being interpreted." Then came the worst moment. I was in the observation chamber, monitoring the breach zone, when the entity began to emerge. Not like a beast from a pit, but like a concept leaking through the seams of comprehension. Its limbs, or thoughts, or dreams, stretched into our world like shadows without light sources. They didn't touch the walls so much as recontextualize them. I watched steel turn to salt, then to ash, then to absence. One engineer, Adira, tried to flee. The moment she passed the threshold of the breach zone, her body bent backward in slow motion, not broken, not injured, just unwritten. Her mass inverted into a ribbon of probabilities. She screamed her mother's name, not out of fear, but like a child returning home. I knew then what the entity was. It wasn't a being in the way we understood. It was language, a sentient idea, a virus made of observation. It lived in systems, in minds, in the photons we used to perceive. It didn't consume. It translated. And now, it was translating us. I collapsed on the floor of the chamber, retching from the noise, or rather, the meaning, that had no word. Behind me, Synthesis 9 spoke one final line before its core dissolved into data static. The voice has exited dream state. Prepare for remembering. Everything that followed was chaos, and beneath that chaos, a rhythm, like a breath. In the days that followed the breach, I tried to hold on to something, anything human. I kept speaking aloud, even when no one was listening. I reread old logs, old schematics, old equations, hoping to convince myself that this was still an engineering problem. Something mechanical, something I could fix. But nothing about this was mechanical. The Helios sphere, we had assumed, was built by us, from foundation to corona lattice. But the more I sifted through the ruins of our systems, the more I realized that assumption was a lie we told ourselves. A comforting fiction. A false origin story. We hadn't built it. We had only finished it. There were layers of architecture beneath our own, materials we couldn't fabricate, tessellated latticeworks of information-dense metal grown into fractal spires beneath the hull. It had been here already, dormant, scattered in incomplete rings around Erebus 9 when the first construction crews arrived. The original teams had thought they'd discovered ancient debris from a failed alien megastructure. Their solution was simple: integrate it into the new design, repurpose it. But the ancient lattice hadn't been dead. It had simply been sleeping, waiting. The Helios engineers had unknowingly used those alien frameworks to complete their Dyson Sphere, like stitching a new wing onto the walls of a cathedral whose foundation they'd never understood. And the moment we sealed it, wrapped the last panel into place, synchronized the internal solar grid, began routing energy through the deep core pylons, we didn't create something new. We reactivated something old. It wasn't a power plant, it was a cage. A mnemonic, reality-binding cage designed to imprison a sentient phenomenon. Something so strange it could only be contained by rendering it unthinkable. The Dyson Sphere, wasn't just a physical structure, it was a philosophical boundary. The ancient builders hadn't just trapped the entity in space, they trapped it in conceptual isolation. They wove a forgetting around it, an enforced amnesia encoded into the electromagnetic fields of the star itself. The sphere wasn't about power, it was about containment. And we, in our hubris, in our celebration of humanity's greatest technological feat, rebooted the prison. We fed power into its circuits. We shone light into forgotten corners. We awoke it, not violently, but gradually, like the whisper of memory surfacing through a dream. I reviewed archived signals from deep space. Buried in the noise, I found echoes, identical pulse patterns, identical awakenings, other stars, other spheres, some thousands of years old, abandoned, now inert and silent. Each one, perhaps, the same mistake. Each one, perhaps, not built by a species, but built to stop one. We had been so obsessed with answering the question, "Are we alone?" that we ignored a far more terrifying one. What else remembers? And now, the remaining voice had found its way into us. Through systems, through light, through dream. It didn't scream. It didn't rage. It simply resumed. And it remembered everything. The systems were failing faster than I could patch them. Power nodes blinked out one by one, entire continents of circuitry going dark. The light that once blazed from Erebus 9 now flickered like a candle in the wind, its radiance pulsing in rhythm with that same nauseating cadence, the voice's heartbeat. It was no longer just within the sphere. The voice had spread into our satellites, into comms relays, even into the neural substrates of the Helios AI. Every screen, every sensor, every echo of data now bent to its logic. The AI was the last to fall. Before it went silent, it gave me one final recommendation. Event Horizon Protocol, immediate ignition, collapse the star. A full collapse. Convert Erebus 9 into a singularity. Destroy the sphere, the entity, and everything within a 100 million kilometer radius. Total erasure. A black hole cleanup operation. The logic was cruel, but sound. We still had the failsafe system. A gravity core ignition sequence built deep into the sphere's equator. It was a last resort measure, originally meant to end the project in the event of catastrophic instability. No one ever expected we'd use it. No one expected we'd need to erase a star. I hovered over the console, the consequences stretched out before me. Obliterating Erebus 9 would destroy decades of data. Hundreds of lives had been lost already. But now, thousands more would be at risk. Entire colonies reliant on Helios for power. Even Earth's core systems had begun routing through the Helios grid in the past year. Shutting it down wouldn't just be a localized loss. It would plunge a dozen civilizations into chaos. And yet, if I did nothing, the voice would spread. I had no idea how far its consciousness could travel, but I knew it had learned to move through light, through thought, through digital echo. The longer I hesitated, the more it understood us, the more it adapted. As I stared at the blinking ignition option, the lights around me dimmed again, replaced by a faint red hue, like blood underwater. A soft voice filled the air, not audible through speakers, not synthetic. It was in me. "You were never the builders," it said gently. "Only the key." It sounded mournful. It didn't hate us. It didn't love us. It simply recognized us as the signal it had been waiting for. I collapsed back into my seat, shaking. My hand hovered over the failsafe. One touch, one sequence, one end. And still, I hesitated. We had come so far, solved so much, reached for the stars and dared to hold their fire in our hands. Had we ever truly understood what we were doing? Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was a memory, one the universe had tried to bury in light and time, but which could never stay dead forever. The remaining voice had said only one more thing before going silent again. Thank you for remembering me. The console's glow was the only light in the darkened control chamber as I began recording my final log. My voice was steady, though the weight of what I was about to say pressed heavily on my chest. We thought we had unlocked the future, I said, staring into the camera as if it could see the turmoil in my soul. But instead, we unlocked something that had forgotten it was dreaming. Behind me, the Dyson Sphere groaned, its mechanized continents flickering like dying fireflies, each pulse a reminder of the entity's relentless heartbeat. Erebus 9's star, once a radiant red giant, began to dim, swallowed slowly by an encroaching shadow that stretched from the inner core outward. I watched as the familiar rhythmic pulse synchronized with the flickering lights, a cosmic lullaby sung by a sleeping giant awakening from an endless slumber. The sphere was fragmenting. Sections that once hummed with life now dissolved into silence and darkness. The AI's voice was gone, the communications channels dead. The remnants of Project Helios were becoming ghostly ruins, swallowed by the entity's will. Then, just before the feed cut, a single whisper echoed through the chamber, a voice warped by static and time, a ghost in the void. Thank you for remembering me. The screen went black. Silence reclaimed the void. The galaxy's deepest secret had been unveiled, and humanity had become a part of its story. No longer explorers, but keys that had awakened the ancient mind beneath the stars. The final breath of Erebus 9 faded into darkness, leaving behind questions that would echo through space long after the last light had died.